Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Frank Coppola. I am the owner of Coppola Brothers LLC. We are marquee residential remodelers. I also happen to be president of one of the National Association of Home Builders Associations in New Jersey. I'm president of Metropolitan Builders and Contractors Association, and also second vice president of Gold Coast Builders Association in Palm Beach. Um, we have some familiar faces here and some new faces. This is our second impromptu crisis education Zoom. And I'll tee this off like I did last week by introducing a past president of Metropolitan Builders, Ronnie Glom. Ronnie, just wave. You don't have to, just going to look illustrious. So, Andy, it was interesting listening to you, and I'll introduce you in a minute when you were talking about when the pandemic hit, what you did. Ronnie and he was president, I was vice president when the pandemic hit, and we just got together and said, how do we help? And one of the things we realized was just getting information out to people was going to be instrumental. So we put together a format for these crisis education Zooms, and the mandate was very simple, which is the same mandate as today. It's real answers to real questions for real people. There's enough nonsense on the TV. If you want to gestalt, you want to complain, great. But in this room, the idea is just like, what do people really need to know? How can we actually help? And I love when we get information out that people can implement right away. And Ronnie and I think, what did we do? 127 Zooms we did. Learned everything we could about the PPP, about unemployment, EIDL, and at the end it was great. I remember that. God, I remember that like it was a one of those life-defining moments. We had a cocktail hour, and everybody shared their success stories, and it was millions and millions of dollars was facilitated in the most cooperative manner possible. And that's kind of also the secret to the sauce here is, look, there are no gotcha questions. We're just trying to all learn. And I believe, and I said this 2 years ago, that there is an opportunity not only to survive, but thrive through difficult times.
Absolutely.
And so, also, what precipitated these past two Zooms is I was having conversations with many people in this Zoom room as I was trying to adjust. There was somebody talking about having a fixed price contract. We'll get to that. And I was running around going, hey, how do I change my contract? What should I do? How do you do, if I do cost plus, what does that exactly mean? Is there a clause in a contract? And then I was saying to Michelle Leopard is the executive officer of Metro BCA up in North Jersey. And I said to Michelle just flippantly, I was like, yeah, I should have just recorded some of these conversations. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Ronnie and I then dusted out the playbook and said, well, let's bring this thing back and see if we can just provide some value to our members again. So it's my hope that we'll do this again more often. I don't know if we'll do it again next week. I kind of want to let it percolate. Um, but with this small crowd, it gives us an opportunity to put some water through the pipes, or as we say, build the airplane while we're flying it. So the first guest I have here is Mr. Bill Asdale. Bill is the owner of Asdale Companies, and I've had the pleasure of knowing Bill for the past 7 years. He was the first person I met at an HBA at an event he had at his one of his properties developments, historic landmark in Long Valley, New Jersey. And Bill is a very interesting guy. I didn't know what to make of him in the beginning because he's just such a giving guy. And the skeptic in me was always waiting for him to sell me the condo, or the timeshare. And but he's an educator by heart, and I consider him a true friend and just a wealth of knowledge. So he's also an NAHB author, past president of Metro BCA, NAHB remodeler chair, and has five daughters, four of which all graduated from Annapolis and have had successful careers in the Navy. I lovingly say that there is not enough time in life to me to grow up and be like this guy, but maybe in my next life I can. So if I sufficiently embarrassed you enough, Bill, I will hand it over to you. and see what you have to say if you can help us navigate some of these inflation issues that we have.
Thank you, Frank. I'm happy to be one of the presenters today. I note we have about half the crowd was not on last week, so I am obliged to run 6 simple slides, an intro and a tail. So it's really only 4 slides to kind of kick off the discussion a little bit about what is commonly seen as a downturn in the market that's coming if it hasn't started already. I think it's a great launch place to some of the technical insights that Andy's going to be sharing and some of the others today, and it's somewhat foundational. I will say for those who've been on this week and were on last week, I got a little bit of pushback, which I really enjoyed from at least one person who was on. They said, housing is not going to go soft because the builders aren't building enough and there's still strong demand. And I just nodded. I mean, none of this is argumentative. I think Frank said a nice tone. It's sharing. And if you don't think what I think, God bless you. I happen to think the way I think because I've been doing this for, well, it's 5 decades since I built my first edition, and I'm still pretty heavy into it, although we don't do retail work anymore. It's all for our own portfolio. I have 3 buildings under contract and a 2-family lot that are in the pipeline for the rest of the year. And, I'm a pretty small potatoes guy, but I also am 100% at risk on all these things. And I think it's important to mitigate risk. And the way to do that is, and fill in the blanks. We're all going to have a different way to do it. One of mine is anticipate the market. So against this pushback, they said, well, builders aren't building enough. There's still strong demand. And my reply in a non-confrontational way was twofold. Number one, recognize that new home construction is less than 1% of the market. It's almost irrelevant. We can't build enough. If we built at this rate for the next 100 years, we would replace half of the properties that are out there, actually slightly less, and could not affect the footprint, the streetscape, the energy efficiency of buildings, even if we built at 1 million a year, because there's 128 million housing units, and the resale turn is anywhere between 5.5 and 7 million a year. So if that slows or consumer demand changes, interest rates, supply chain risks, all of the above, be prepared for a very swift cascade of transactions that is going to take new home builders with them and certainly take existing homes down. I've seen it. I've been through 4 of these pretty nasty ones, starting with stagflation, and some of you may have to look it up in Wikipedia. I got to live it. It's a real thing, and it's a real issue. So we start by a brief slide looking at some deceleration in growth. The growth has been amazing in some markets, as much as 15 to 20% over the last quarter from 2021. That's a rebound, and it's only on 5 million units. So if the other 123 million units are out there spending potentially hollow equity, they're going to add themselves to the forbearance pool as rates either adjust or, if they're in adjustable rates or they want to get out at a lower point. What they put at risk is their equity. So this drop in growth still anticipates a 3.2% growth on a quarter-to-quarter basis. But boy, that can change in a heartbeat. Double-digit changes are certainly a possible retraction. So I think you need to start with market intel and create your own view. You don't want my view. You don't want anybody else's view. It's your company. If our friend in fixed price contract land thinks that that's going to be stable long enough for the time for him to build, then so be it. He's very comfortable with that. If I were to advise you need some cost escalators and some shifting of risk to tenants, to subs, to who knows who else. There's a lot of options, many strategies out there. If you don't think you need those, then you don't take them, proceed. But if you have sleepless nights, think there are solutions that were not implemented. You create your own view. Off of that view, you then get to adjust your plan. Because if you think the market is ascending, you have one plan. If you think the market's stable, it's a different plan. If you think it's descending or at the edge of a cliff, a completely different plan. Do not operate the company that you operated in 2021 or 2018, or you've been operating your parents' company since, 1998. It's a new plan every time you create a new view. How do you get a view? Well, you can go pretty deep into this. The military intel does it one way. I kind of like their systems. Economists do it another. Gypsies spin the Ouija board. You do it however you want, but the view should be changing based on what you see. And here I put a little clip up, a recession predictor chart. There are economists doing really fine work on this. After you adjust your view, you get to execute, monitor, measure. Is it working? If it's not, go back and see if your view was wrong. If it wasn't your view, then maybe your plan wasn't aggressive enough. Ultimately, what you want at the epicenter is a profitable company on at least a year-to-year basis. And on a year-to-year basis, it will always be profitable if it's profitable on a job-to-job basis. You really don't want to get caught short. And lots of guys do. Many of these downturns have had either excess inventory, locked in prices that on the sell side, but not locked in on the other side. And all of a sudden you get whacked, and plenty of people disappear in downturns that probably don't need to. So I would suggest find and think through your own data. National data is probably a lot easier to get than local data. You're going to have to dig to find your own. Find a realtor that knows what days on the market means and what the impact could be. That's a piece of it. And look at local data for job growth, for income growth, the shift of people in and out of the cities after leaving in COVID. Some are going back. Does that mean prices are rebounding? You need really current data before you invest against those trends, including anecdotal data. One of the guys that attends our real estate boot camp looks at the vacancy in a suburban train station lot, and typically the lot has a backlog of about 6 months to get a permit. And in the last downturn, it was 30% vacant every single day. As it started to fill, he took that as a positive sign. Perfectly legitimate, use what you want, but look for indicators because they're all over the place. What strategy is right for you? If you really think it's going to turn down, and I think it is, you can adjust as you see fit and stand aside. At least 2 different times, I went dark on the buy side for as much as 5 years, and talk about a chiding from some of the peers in the Builders Association. What's the matter with you? How come you're not buying? I'm buying dirt. I'm buying land. I'm buying wrecks. What's the matter with you? And I just was way more comfortable standing aside. So if you think foreclosure, forbearance, working their way through the courts, and New Jersey's tenant-friendly courts, by the way, across the country, there are 11 million properties in distress right now. That's a big number, whether they're delayed, late on their mortgages, in forbearance, which is cleared, but not cleared the courts yet. I mean, that backlog in the courts is really deep. And as those come out, you could be creating a perfect storm. Excess supply against the declining market. And why would it decline? Because interest rates are going up. There's plenty of uniqueness of having very low unemployment now and higher salaries, but they certainly aren't going up the same rate housing prices did. So you can transfer risks also. You can adjust your plan, do things differently. Lots of guys who are on the cusp will retreat to remodeling, sign a few good jobs, and then look for lots on the downside that they can come back into the next turn up. Surely there will be another turn. Is it 9 years away or is it 2 years away? We'll all have our own opinions on that. I think you also need to understand what tolerance you have for liquidity. How many months of operating costs have you put into a reserve? How many months of personal expenses have you put into reserves? Have you tapped credit lines? I can tell you credit lines expire. I have one on a property and it had a 10-year window on it. And boy, they were pretty happy to yank it because it had a flat rate. And late last year, they wanted, all fresh stocks to start again. So take a look at all these things, figure out where you are with liquidity, and that will help you understand how deep a trough you can take, how much you can withstand, or do you need to stand aside? I did put a book together, and I assure you this is not a pitch for the book. I did this for NEHB. I believe in this and I live this. It's called Defensive Estimating, Protecting Your Profits. Profits should be the priority and the most important line in every estimate. And when you ask some of your peers, hey, what do you think the most important line on your estimate sheet is? You'll get everything from lumber, because that is typically the highest percentage cost, or labor, if guys aggregate all the subs, maybe overhead. But my advocacy is that profit is the number one thing, and you cannot go by a day rate or a markup, because you can eat all that stuff up in a heartbeat. So I put several hundred pages of concepts together of how to protect that profit. Every effort you use getting up in the morning, going to sleep at night, is thinking about how you can protect that profit. So there's terms and clauses. You can reduce risks, offset risks, lay off risks to other people. Certainly monitoring along the way is critical. Every operational effort should be to protect that profit. And ideally at the end of the job, maybe it's even enhanced because you used what I call in the book street pricing. What's the value of a roof? If it's currently $300 a square, then plug it into the estimate at 300 a square, not the 220 that your current contractor will do it for, because the next thing you know, he wakes up, realizes he's the low man on the street. He wants 275, and now you're subsidizing the roofs from the 2.25 that you had in the estimate to the 275, albeit still in the market, that you are going to be paying for it. So look at that and use street pricing along the way. It is a structurally different way to think about business, as opposed to zero-based estimating. Gee, how much is it going to cost me to do this? To a profit-based estimating. How much do I charge someone so that I can make the right amount of funds? We've got a lot of good content backing me up on this today. I wish you well in your planning. Create a view, adjust your plan, execute defensively to protect your profits, and we ought to come out of this, whatever this is coming at us, solid and still moving forward. Thanks to Frank and Michelle for putting this together. I did have an email up there. I'll throw it in the chat room, and gladly we'll take any follow-ups that may be of interest.
Bill, it's just, what is it? When the student is ready, the teacher, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And it's amazing, like just in this very similar presentation from last week, how you can just hear something different. And I challenge you, because I'm looking at many of you who I know, and I challenge you just to give yourself the space to think differently. Just because you've been doing something a certain way and it's worked doesn't mean there's not room for improvement. Like, look, I went to Gettysburg College, always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I thought I was going to open a deli, took my statistics class, took my accounting class, and was taught you grow a P&L to fund your balance sheet. And then I met Bill, and Bill was like, proverbially smacks me upside the head, because no, grow your balance sheet to fund your P&L. And I was like, what? And then the first person I met in construction just figured out what stuff cost and added 20%. And then that was the second smack. Okay, I wear their safety glasses now after Bill poked him in the eye. And then so now the song in my head is, what's it worth? What's it worth? What's it worth? So I challenge you to think this thing through, and if you can give yourself the space to that. What's surprising is how something you never thought. Look, if you never thought of it before, you never thought of it before. But you have to allow yourself for this new thought to go, hey, son of a gun. Look, I struggled with cost plus pricing, with profit or charging uh, cost plus, because I just didn't understand how you can make money until the conversations with Bill and with Ray. That, oh, wait a minute, a lot of this stuff that I thought was overhead is not overhead. That gets billed right to the job, and all of a sudden a light bulb went up. But I was struggling for years to figure that out. I'm just not slow learner there, Frank Severino. It just takes a while to get it through the skull. So, and I will plug Bill's book. That defensive estimating is fantastic. If I don't care who you are, I don't care if you're a builder or an attorney or something. It's a great way to just look at business, because Bill just will give you an avenue to go, oh, I never thought something that was worth money before. I mean, quite frank, I'm such a fan of this guy because he's made me an incredible amount of money. Oh yeah, that book's good too. But, just planting the seed of saying, well, why don't you charge for that? Why don't you charge for that? Well, how do you know you're not charging for that? And that's kind of exciting when you realize you've been doing something anyway, and you've been giving it away for free, right? And here's my last thing. I'll close the chapter and we'll get Andy on stage here. Is most of the time the difficulty is because whatever it is that's worth so much, you do naturally. That's why artists have agents, right? That's why rock stars have agents, because they inherently just don't see the value. They're too busy creating their art. And I've always said, in entrepreneurs in a way are artists. And you go, well, I just do that anyway because it's easy. But that doesn't mean you can't charge handsomely for it. And that's a new lesson I'm learning lately. I am just a white belt. One day will be the multiple degree black belt. So thank you, Bill. And we're gonna definitely have some time for some questions at the end. So I know there's some folks that have some specific questions. So save them. Don't run away. All right. Well, I have, by the way, before I get into Andy here, when you get those like emails that come in all the time, and 95% of them you just throw in the spam. Andy, in his other life, must be a marketing guy or have a great market, because his emails that come through. I mean, I met him in 3D about a year ago, I guess, and then got on the list. But I've been such a fan of his content. And then when we said, hey, let's do this crisis again, Andy was one of the first people to call. I'm like, dude, you got to get in here because you're singing our song. So
Awesome.
Andy is the founder of Wyman Legal Solutions, a boutique law firm in Boca Raton, Florida, focusing on construction, business, and real estate litigation. Andy's been practicing law for 25 years. And although he's a lawyer, construction is in his blood. Growing up on Long Island, Andy's father and grandfather were contractors, and his father is still a GC down in Florida. After graduating from Fordham Law School in '96, Andy worked in New York City until he moved to Florida in 1999. He lives in Boca with his wife and 2 kids. Andy and his firm serve as outside general counsel to a number of construction industry companies and professionals. And when the pandemic hit, Andy dove into everything relating to the Paycheck Protection Program. PPP is so much easier to say. And he helped 24 clients attain their PPP loans during their critical time of need. He's here today to talk about the pandemic-related program, the Employee Retention Credit, or ERC. We have Andy's info in the chat, and Michelle, our executive officer for Metro, is going to email everybody on the list. I really encourage you to follow up, not only with our speakers, but anybody else in the room. As I said last week, and cooperation is a new form of currency. So, Andy, what do you have for us?
Well, thanks, Frank. Hey, and kudos to you and to Ronnie for running what you did during the pandemic, because it was a tough time for everybody, and for anyone who wanted an excuse to fold up and close shop. The pandemic gave them the perfect opportunity to make that excuse. But like you pointed out, where especially as a lawyer, it's our job is to solve problems. So in that situation where everyone was facing a problem, I feel it was really incumbent upon us as attorneys to try to be able to solve problems and come up with solutions for our clients. Obviously, the better my clients do, the better I do. If all my clients went out of business, that would be tough for me. So like you guys, I tried to do what I could to generate value for my clients, and I felt the best way to do that was to get into these programs that were put ahead by the government and designed to be a lifeline to businesses. And so there is still some of that to be had, so to speak. And I want to talk to you today about something called, it's a tax credit. It's something called the Employee Retention Credit, and it's available to everybody. And the purpose of this Employee Retention Credit was to encourage employers to keep people employed during the pandemic and on payroll, even if they were not necessarily working during 2020 and 2021 due to the effects of coronavirus. So to give you some of the history and for you to understand why this, I'll call it the ERC, the Employee Retention Credit, is such an interesting opportunity. When COVID first hit, you'll remember the government created the CARES Act, right, with various business relief provisions in it and programs. And this ERC came out as part of that. So when they passed the CARES Act right at the beginning of the pandemic, they created the PPP loans, which everybody went nuts about. Those were those forgivable loans that the government gave you based on 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. You'll remember that if you spent it the right way, the loan was forgiven, meaning you didn't have to pay it back, right? The government, they've also created, or rather changed, something called an EIDL, or an EIDL loan, which a bunch of people went out and got. And that was a loan you do have to pay back, and you do have to use it for certain things, but it was a very long-term, like 30-year loan at a fixed 3.5% interest rate. And so it was a way to get cheap money for the longer term. And then they created this tax credit. But at the time that they created it, you could not get both a PPP loan and get this tax credit. That was how the law was originally written. So everybody more or less ignored the tax credit because it seemed kind of complicated, and the PPP was much quicker money, which everyone at that time certainly felt they needed. So fast forward a little bit later in the pandemic, and I don't remember exactly when it was, maybe late 20 or 20 or early 2021, they revised the CARES Act, and suddenly they said, you could do both. You can have this tax credit and get this tax credit, even if you've already got the PPP loan. So let me just sort of give you an idea of how it works and how much money it can be, so you understand. I'm going to talk about the numbers first because, frankly, that's the exciting part. And then, then we'll talk about kind of briefly some of the more boring legal stuff and how you qualify to possibly get this credit. So for 2020 and for 2021 tax years, there's this tax credit. It's a refundable tax credit. So doesn't matter how much you paid in taxes. This is a tax credit that is a credit against employment taxes that you've paid, not income taxes, okay? So for 2020, what you could, if you qualify for the maximum benefit available, the IRS sends you back a check for up to $5,000 per employee for 2020, and for up to $7,000 per employee per quarter for the first 3 quarters of 2021. So if you're eligible, you could possibly receive a $26,000 check per employee from the government for every employee you have. Now, the real calculations is that it's for 2020, it's like 50% of wages that you've spent up to 10,000. There's a lot of math that goes on and legal analysis that goes on too, but from a 30,000-foot view perspective, you have the ability to get a refund to you from the government for up to $26,000 per employee through for the periods of 2020 and 2021. Subject, of course, and conditioned upon all the math and qualifying, like I said, but that's the potential. So it is some very, very significant money that's still available to be had for your business. Now, you can get this if you have only one employee, not the owner, not if you're just a self-employed and you're the owner and the only employee of your business. This is for other non-family employees. Or some companies are qualifying for hundreds of thousands of dollars in a refund from the IRS. So this is a very a very big deal. And unlike PPP and unlike EIDL and some of these other programs, you can spend the money however you want. When you get it, there's no restrictions. This is not a loan. This is a tax credit coming back to you for employment taxes you've already paid. So I work with for this, I work in conjunction with another law firm who I introduce clients to. They sort of do the nuts and bolts work, evaluating your circumstances and applying for the credit for you and everything that goes along with that. And one of the biggest challenges we have in speaking to people about this is that convincing them that this is real, because it almost seems too good to be true. So that's the math side of it. How do you qualify? So there's two ways to qualify. And this is a kind of a really important point, because if you don't hear this properly, you might have a misconception or a misunderstanding about it. One way to qualify is if you had a really big revenue decline on a quarter over quarter analysis. So we're talking about like a 50% decline, let's say from quarter 3 in 2019 to quarter 3 in 2020, or a 20% decline when you compare quarter 3 in 2019, let's say, to quarter 3 in 2021. And again, it's a quarter by quarter analysis. So some quarters you may qualify, some quarters you may not. But basically, so one way is to qualify, so you have this really big revenue decline. And so people that own restaurants, people and concert venues, places like that, it's pretty easy to establish that they had those kinds of losses. But while some builders or contractors may have experienced that, many didn't, and many were flat or actually grew through the pandemic. So the other way to qualify is to show that certain government shutdown orders had a big impact on your business that effectively prevented you from doing your job or moving projects forward, or really required substantial changes in how you went about doing your business. For example, when areas were shut down or closed, or municipalities wouldn't issue permits for a period of time, there can be an argument made that you suffered a partial suspension of your business that made it difficult for you to carry your operations and move your jobs forward. And again, there's these two ways to qualify: is the revenue decline or being affected by shutdown orders. And the problem is, a lot of well-meaning accountants and lawyers out there kind of thought it had to be both, but it doesn't. It's not that you have to suffer both a revenue decline and the shutdown, or be subject to subject to shutdown orders. It's an or. So there's this big misconception out there for those who are kind of advising on this, and in having discussions with accountants about this, accountants who had tried to, sort of learn a little bit about what I'm describing to you, their faces go white over Zoom when I explain to them, and they go, "Holy crap, I can't believe I've misled so many of my clients because I didn't read the law closely enough to make sure I was giving good advice." And and it's honestly, it's not a thing that a lot of people took a lot of time to study and understand, again, because everyone was so focused on PPP, and for a long time it was PPP or this, and this was largely ignored. And I mean, and there is legal work involved there. This isn't a typical, it's not just doing the math of figuring out what your payroll is and taking a percentage and sticking it on a one-page form. There's a lot of analysis that is done on really a client-by-client basis to determine whether one business would qualify or another. And there are some gray areas in it, which is kind of where attorneys are used to operating, so to speak. But it is certainly a huge opportunity, I think, for a lot of people. And so, if they're, one of the things that this law firm I work in conjunction with, that they provide, and why I like them so much and they're so good at what they do, is they will provide along with this an analysis and actually a legal opinion letter. If they do believe that they can help you and they do believe that you qualify, you'll get a letter from a lawyer that explains exactly why you've qualified and what the justification was. And so, look, this is an IRS, related program, if you will. So there will be, perhaps one day, audits can be done, and an IRS auditor or a person who works for the IRS can certainly come and do an after the fact analysis. But if you have a tax opinion letter from a lawyer supporting the decision to apply for this employee retention credit, you're going to be, 10 steps above everyone else who didn't bother. Some companies, some of these payroll companies have actually started processing these sorts of applications for this credit on behalf of their clients without really having the legal analysis behind them. And maybe they're just basing it off of, again, those businesses who had that big decrease in revenue, because like I said, that's sort of a fairly easy analysis. But even for companies that survived and, to Frank's point, thrived during the pandemic, this tax program is an opportunity to perhaps get money back that you never thought you were going to get. So it's a process. This is not a quick thing like the PPP was, although you'll remember back at the time it didn't seem so quick. But in hindsight, it was pretty quick how fast the government got money in your hands. This is different. This obviously requires a lot of analysis and calculations. And then ultimately, if you are determined that you do qualify, there's amended tax returns that need to be recorded and needs to be filed rather. And these are not your income tax returns, but rather these are the Form 941s, if you're familiar with what those are, since this is a payroll tax credit. Those quarterly payroll tax returns need to get amended on something, a new 941X form, and it gets prepared and filed on your behalf. So, if anyone wants more information, I'll be happy to answer questions that I can right now. But certainly there is I can introduce you to this law firm I work through for this kind of thing, and and there's no risk to seeing if you qualify, because all the work is done on a contingency basis, and so.
Well, that's a key thing.
Yes.
I just rewind 6.5 minutes on the law that most people assumed it was this and that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I was listening to you and I just reminded me of, it depends on what the definition of the word is.
Yes.
But that's huge, right? Because like you're sitting here listening to this and your brain is going, all right, does this apply to me? Does this apply to me? This doesn't apply to me. No, it can't apply. Well, how do you know?
Sure.
Like you don't know.
And that's the thing, where you're located makes a difference, because each municipality had certain type of shutdown orders. For example, where I am here in Palm Beach County, and with the work I do is litigation work, it involves going to court. It involves bringing my clients' cases forward and pushing it through the court system as best I can. It involves doing depositions, being across the table from people and evaluating that, how honest they are and what kind of witnesses they're going to make and their credibility. And all of that was changed by the pandemic. Now, on a revenue basis, I didn't suffer the revenue loss. I found a way to make up for it by helping people out in other ways. But realistically, I had cases I couldn't move forward. Court proceedings were halted for months at a time before they decided to start using Zoom. And even in that situation, it's affected my ability to be as effective for people because I'm doing things over Zoom instead of being in person. And so I've applied for this, and I've used this law firm to do it because they've got CPAs on staff, and they've got the ability to provide me the protection of an opinion letter as to whether or not I will qualify for it. So, and at the time that the pandemic hit, I had no employees outside of myself and my wife. But a few months later, I hired a director of client relations. Then I hired a lawyer. Then I hired a paralegal. And so by the time 2021 ended, I already had a few employees. And so for certain quarters, I will qualify. And I don't yet know what I'm getting back, but I do have the opinion from the lawyer that I'm entitled to apply for the credit and see what it is.
And we're not going to get through all the weeds in this thing.
No,
and this is one of the this is like the magic of the HBAs. As Frank Severino knows, he planted the seed. Are you enjoying the catnip of the FHBA? And now I got a whole batch growing here that we're sprinkling out. As you're processing this, I encourage you don't think about yourself. Think if there's someone else that you know out there that maybe would want to have a conversation about this, and then we can do this. We can do this again, but like pay it forward, because that's just the magic of these HBAs. If you went into this thing trying to say, well, what's in it for me, it doesn't work. And I guarantee every single, Josh, like brand new here, you're going, okay, this probably doesn't apply to you, but I guarantee you might know somebody that would want to like, hey, do you know about this ERC? And then you're the freaking rock star because you helped one of your friends out, and we both know who I'm talking about, right? Right. But like that's the thing, especially why we're doing these nice small groups. I really encourage you to get these conversations going. It doesn't cost anything. It doesn't hurt. You know, you're looking out for somebody, and then who knows? Then as word spreads, and you go like, and Andy goes, "Hey, I just got back, 83 X, whatever it is, thousands, hundreds, 10,000s." Frank Severino goes, he's got a huge, huge Rolodex, knows a ton of people. Look, let's see if we can help somebody out. This is that little statement that you just said, Andy, that it's the law is not this and that, it's or.
Yeah.
Like I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get it, but it's enough for me to start wanting to run around and start talking to other people about it. So
absolutely. And look, the lawyers will have a conversation with you and find out how the pandemic impacted you in ways that were other than just your bottom line, or rather your revenue figures. And so and figure out the right way to make the argument in the presentation.
I'm gonna interrupt this special broadcast to just embarrass my son. Here, come on in here, Mitchell. This is my son Mitchell, who just turned 21 today. This is the oldest Coppola brother. Okay, this is he's the hammer. There's the hammer and the saw. Mitchell's the hammer. His brother Joey's the saw. It's only because Mitchell does everything the hard way. Happy birthday, buddy. Happy birthday. Very much. Love you. Love you too. Okay. He's a brave soul for letting me do that to him.
Nice.
Oops, sorry about that. Get you back in my head. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Okay, good.
Good. Yeah.
It was one question in the chat box, and then I want to open up before we lose time.
Yeah.
Andy, is the entire process handled by accountants or a law firm specializing in the tax credit, or both?
It's the law firm handling it. They will need, however, information from you. There are, and some of that information you might have to get from your accountants, and so it's going to require you to gather those 941s I mentioned as an example. These quarterly tax employment tax reports that you returns that you file. Going back to like 2019, you're going to need those. And there's other information. If you have a payroll company, there's certain reports you're probably going to need from that, a roster of employees and that, dates of employment and that kind of thing.
All right. Well, Michelle's going to get the list
I have
out.
one question on that, Frank. A follow-up?
Yeah, Frank.
That was, does the law firm have to specialize in labor law or?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, it's really more, it's more business and corporate work, and this is a kind of thing that it's not really a labor law. When you say labor law, I think of the relationship between the employer and the employee, and things like if they're getting paid a fair wage and working conditions, right, harassment and safety and all those kinds of things. This is completely separate and apart from that. Okay. But you would certainly want a law firm that's got CPAs on staff too, because there is like I said, the returns need to get amended that were filed.
Okay.
And the one thing is, when you do get a check, it does affect your tax from that year. So for example, let's say, if you look at the money you've spent on employment taxes during 2021, well, now you're getting a bunch of that money back. It's gonna affect it becomes a taxable event to you. So the money that you receive is taxed. So, but that's the only. All
right, hold on. I'm gonna start bleeding out of my eyes soon.
Yes, I don't want to bog us down in how the sausage gets made. But
there we go. All right, I have Josh. Hang on one second, David. Are you still there, David Villain? If you're there, come back to the camera because I know you had a question. Go ahead, Josh.
Does this apply going forward, or is it just retroactive 2020 and 2021?
It's actually just the last 3 quarters of 2020 and the first 3 quarters of 2021 are the only time periods they look at. But you have the ability to amend a quarterly return up to 3 years after you filed it in the first place. So the work can now just start to be done to do the evaluation and the analysis and get to the point where you need to, let's say, file an amended return, but it's just those 6 quarters.
Okay, so it's not too late to do anything retroactive.
Absolutely.
But it will expire. It's not something worth planning for future quarters or knowing about.
Exactly. It's backwards looking at this point.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thanks.
Good question.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think David had since we're recording this, we can send it to him, the video. Oh, there he is. So David, you had said earlier that you were nervous. You have some contracts that are sold, but prices are going up. What's your
Yeah, it's just,
concern?
the inflation's hitting. I should be doing pretty good with the projects. I'll make a profit, but I'm locked in with a sale price. And then, sheetrock's going up, everything else is going up besides the allowance items that they're going to be stuck paying, right? The buyer of the project. So, that's the issue there. It's a little scary.
So this is new home construction.
New home. Yeah, one's a new home and one's a major remodel.
So I guess I should defer this question. Advice from the big guys in the room, Frank or Andy. If you have two contracts in there and you're sitting in David's shoes, obviously if you have an allowance schedule, it's not going to absorb all the costs. Look, I've heard horror stories. Ray, I think Wendy was telling me a story that there were a couple small home builders that got wiped out because of the trusses. They didn't have an escalation clause in their contracts, and that's why the FHBA just put out that escalation clause. So, where's a good starting point with the brain trust in this room? Who's David's first phone call after this Zoom? Don't all jump at once.
Bill, I was going to say Bill first, and then I can follow up after that.
All his subs, all his vendors, right now, ideally you would escalate or accelerate some of the draws, but if that's off the radar, at least start locking down that risk from everybody and transferring it off. Typically, there are 2,000 SKUs in a house, and there are between 50 and 65 subcontractors. So I would actually start to look at that and quantify it. Which ones can you lock down? And some percentage of them, I'm sure you can. You can minimize your risk over the next 5 days just by working a little harder into the future and trying to lock as many as you can. If you have some available cash, I would buy some discounts right now. Inventory stuff where possible. That will minimize your risk as well. And I'd start there probably. If there's a labor issue, see if you can get anybody to, go out 4 months or 6 months. You say sheetrock prices. Well, buy it and inventory it, pay for it, prepay for it. Tell them to put it on their rack somewhere and, deliver it later. You'll cover some gas prices. I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about in that 2,000 items, and 50 to 65 subs that you can actually transfer some risk off of your balance sheet.
And, Bill, you mentioned that's anecdotal evidence too. One of our Tony Berardo, one of our board members up in New Jersey, forwarded a couple auction sites to me, who said normally there'd be like one auction a month, two auctions. I sent it to you, Frank Belgiovini, and now there's like every single day, folks, getting rid of stuff. So. And that's not something you see on cable news. So, David, you also might want to explore some of that if these are basic materials. I'm just saying, usually you don't solve these problems with one phone call or one thing. It's
what's that
said.
site that they auction stuff off?
I'll get it, and I'll have Michelle
Okay.
included when she sends the follow-up email.
Yeah, I'm doing whatever I can. The best I was able to do is I pre-order some HVAC equipment. Once I reach out to a lot of the guys, I ask them, what's going up. A lot of the guys I deal with are small guys. They don't have the ability to store materials. Like my drywall guy, he's not going to store materials. It's even, I got hit right at the beginning of the year. Material went up on the house I was loading. And he said I was locked in. And then he turns around and sends me a $3,000 increase because I didn't take delivery on it. So he tells me I was locked in with the company he was buying from. And I got hit with a $3,000 extra bill.
Frank B., you were going to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Dave, did you start the jobs yet?
Yeah.
Okay, and they're all fixed price lump sum contracts?
Yes, besides the allowance numbers.
Okay. How many what kind of allowances do you have?
Well, I just got allowances for appliance cabinets, countertops, a lot of the finished materials. Yeah.
Okay, because I was going to say if you had more allowances, I mean, you're covered under the allowances, obviously.
Right.
But and I agree with you with the sheetrock and lumber's going up and down, and then you got steel.
Yeah, it's so hard to control is what I'm finding. Yeah. And
but
even to fill out the NHAB HB escalation, it was very difficult to get that in a way that would be acceptable by the buying attorney.
But do you have any types of clauses like that in the contract?
Nope.
Okay, and you're actually the developer, you're building to set for sale, or
Correct.
the one house?
Yeah.
Hmm.
No,
You know, I think it's I would look at
Can you
every-
ask for money for materials prior to lock in? Can you do anything like that? I mean, I'm not experienced. I'm just asking because I overheard somebody talking about that, where they get money in advance for the materials, or to like a pre-purchase lock-in kind of thing.
well, that's what I'm doing, and wherever I can. I mean, I got cash reserves. So the only thing I'm able to do at this time was I ordered the HVAC for the 2 houses. I locked that in.
Yeah.
So anything that I know, I try to.
Yeah, I think just as life works, it's a little bit of everything, but being disciplined enough to look at everything.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, that's my advice. Knowing the people in this room is that it's just like, fine, follow. If you had one attorney look at it, have another one look at it. If one vendor says you got to take this material, great. You know, go get a discounted trailer that somebody's unloading and put all your materials in there, so you've minimized your risk. You know, it's all hands on deck. I guess that's the moral I'm saying.
Yeah,
All right,
and
we
I
have
think
5 minutes left, so I wanted to see, is there any other questions out there? I don't want to suck up all the oxygen in the room here, even though I can do that very easily.
If
David,
there isn't, then
Daniel?
I just want to say, David, I think the best thing I guess you look at it, you're lucky that it's only one house and one renovation. Just lock in what Bill was saying, lock it in as best you can, as fast as you can. And if you're still going to make some money on it, count your blessings. Because if you don't have any terms in your contracts that you could go in and ask for escalations, or maybe, I don't know, legally, this could be a force majeure that an attorney could
Never
hang
heard
his
that
hat
term.
on.
What's that?
I'm sorry?
I never heard that term. What's that term?
Yeah, you gotta look it up. There's a legal description on it. I guess, Andy, maybe you could.
Usually it's reserved for things like acts of God, things that are truly outside of the control of any of the parties. But generally speaking, this sort of thing is not that.
You don't think
Unless
so?
unless it's specifically defined into the contract that way. And yeah, and going forward, certainly, if you're, I mean, I had a situation recently. I was representing the owner, which was a condo association that's redoing their clubhouse. And it's like an 11 or $12 million project. And, these were issues that we talked about up front with the contractor about, what kind of problems are we going to have getting materials, and what kind of problems we're going to have with the cost escalations. And he wanted a cost escalation provision in there. And we negotiated one that we felt worked for both sides. And we also encouraged, let's try to get as many of these materials in our possession as quickly and early as possible, even if that meant, as the owner, we had to pay for storage, because this was a cost plus situation. But storage of those materials was something that was passed through to the owner, because there was a decision that was made to try to get them early and store them, because we felt that was a better cost control than the risk of what those materials might cost later on.
All right, in our
Agreed.
final
I'm in
few
a
minutes
similar
here,
situation now.
final few minutes here, I'm gonna plant the seed, and this is my teaser for the next call. So, as many of my friends know, I love podcasts. I love reading, watching anything I can to learn. That's what I do, since I'm allergic to sleep. And one of the things I heard was, in tough times, the calm heads prevail. If 40% of all tradesmen and women are going to retire in the next 10 years, that is going to be such opportunity to slide into opportunity. What that means is you're going to have businesses out there. If like you think those auction sites are auctioning all this stuff, well, there's a business attached to it. What's happening to that business? That business has a brand. That business might have a couple employees. So there's going to be an opportunity in this transfer for the calmer heads then to step sideways into something. you know, David, maybe you'll find a facility to renovate that's got a warehouse available to it. Now going forward, you've got a place to store your own stuff. But as I said earlier, it's providing yourself the space in your head to go, okay, yes, this faucet shut off. Wow, this is tough. I'm not making money this way, or I'm losing money this way. But what's the opportunity behind it? So that's my teaser for the next one we're going to host and hold up. I really appreciate everybody coming. As I said last week, you know, if you try to assemble this team of experts and you had to hire everybody in this room, you couldn't do it. I don't care who it is. You wouldn't be able to get. We have such an amazing amount of talent, and I just want to say I've never seen Ray Puzatello this quiet ever in the year and a half I've known him. It's just your mute button must not unmute. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. I'm very grateful to be in such a wonderful company. Andy, thank you for your time. Bill
Thank
Asdale,
you.
thank you for your expertise. And I look forward to seeing you all again in 2D or in 3D. Until then, Frank Coppola, Metro Builders, and Coppola Brothers signing off. We'll see you
Take
next
care,
week.
everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.